Well, welcome to the Funding and Revenue Panel session this afternoon. How's everybody enjoying the conference so far? Or anything? Good. This session is going to focus on funding models for cultural and asset-based economic and community development efforts. Congressman Hal Rogers, who was a key member on appropriations in Congress, and if you don't, for those of you who don't know, the Appropriations Committee is where the money comes from, so they're very important. He once told me that an idea without funding is a hallucination. And so this session is on funding. So we've given you some ideas, so we don't want any of this to be a hallucination. We want you all to take from this and this to be a complete conference. So I'm very excited for this panel today. I wanted to quickly introduce the panel. We've got some superstars or some rock stars up here. So I wanted to start out with someone who's sitting down. Teresa Cameron, who's sitting down, got to stand up, come on, is manager of local arts agency services at Americans for the Arts. She works very closely with local arts teams to help develop and implement programs and services that strengthen the field of over 5,000 local art agencies across the U.S. She has an extensive arts background, including being the CEO of Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County, Maryland for 10 years, and she's been basically involved in all kinds of nonprofits in Maryland and other places for her career. Teresa, thank you so much for coming and being on this panel. Next, we have Mickey Sager. There's Mickey raising her hand, Vice President of the Conservation Fund, a national nonprofit with a dual mission of environmental protection and sustainable economic development. Mickey is one of the stars I was talking about. Her star is in innovation. She helps make projects work. So when you see a project working, chances are Mickey is there behind the scenes making it happen. Harriet Cannon, there's Harriet, has served as as area director for the Union City USDA Rural Development Office since 2010. As area director, she has a staff of 10. She has a 10-person staff, administers over 40 loan and grant programs in 9 Northwest Tennessee counties. Previously, Harriet was area director in Covington and Jackson area offices. During her 29 years of service with USDA Rural Development, she served all kinds of posts in West Tennessee. Guess couldn't get you out of West Tennessee, could we? And also in the community as well, and the one that was interesting to me in your community service, you are president of the Tipton County Carl Perkins Child Abuse Prevention Board of Directors. I think that's great. You're a native of Friendship, Tennessee, and in our session, we had a session this morning, and so you was basically an advertisement, Harriet, for your program. So you're probably going to get some grant requests out of this conference. So my apologies. And last but not least is Ray Daffner. He is manager of the Capital Policy Initiative at the Appalachian Regional Commission. Ray leads efforts at ARC are basically in the entrepreneurship ventures to build on the Appalachian region's assets and grow new jobs. And I just want to say Ray and I work together, although at the Appalachian Regional Commission, although when you work with Ray Daffner, you really work for Ray Daffner. Because with Ray, we called him the idea man, and ideas always cost lots of money, and they were always crazy, out of the box, but he came armed with the people to make it happen, and the resources and the numbers. And he always made us proud. And I will say, of everybody I've ever worked with in the public sector, Ray is the most entrepreneurial-minded person I've ever met and worked with. So Ray, we're so glad to have you on this panel. So with that, what we're going to do is everybody's going to give their presentations. about their organization, funding opportunities, or what they've seen other organizations do as far as seeking funding. Then we're going to have a little controlled question and answer among ourselves, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So with that, I think, Teresa, you're going to start first.
So today I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these funding models for cultural asset-based and placemaking with the economy and community development efforts. I'm not going to give you like where you can find the money exactly, but I'm going to give you some examples in different ways that you can think about using economic development materials and items to make your case and to also improve your communities. So what I want to talk a little bit about are, first and foremost, a little bit about cultural districts, which I'll get to, and some models. So the first model is Paducah, Kentucky. And how many of you have been to Paducah? Oh, great. Well, a while ago, they had some amazing leaders in Paducah, and they had a lot of bad, trashy housing right in the heart of their downtown. So they decided, well, who can make this better? And they had a very, very great mayor and electeds, and they said, let's get artists in here. They can do it. So guess what they did? They allowed artists to come in and pay $1 in some cases for housing, which then the artists could rehab and make into their spaces. And of course, they had to be there for a while and be resident artists. But it's been highly successful. Now the whole downtown is transformed basically because of the arts. Some of the things that they've used that really didn't cost the community very much money at all, but really attracted not only artists but a lot of restaurants, a lot of mixed-use housing, is changes in zoning. That's a really easy thing for you guys to think about when you're working in your communities. It's not hard to get zoning changed. Believe me, I've done it. It's really not too hard. It doesn't cost any money. It just takes a little bit of legwork. Marketing. One of the big things that they do is they really work with their Conference and Visitors Bureau, Department of Economic Development, to help the artists learn about and train to market themselves, and then in turn they market the community. They also provide matching funds for artists to relocate to downtown, but not only artists, but for-profit arts industry businesses and restaurants. So it's not just about the arts, it's also about bringing all those other kinds of things that help feed on each other. Moving assistance, they pay up to $2,500 for folks to move into the area, and startup costs. But the big thing that I wanted to point out too is that the local Paducah Bank has made over $30 million in loans and investments to this. So the bank has done very well. They're really happy because they're getting a very good return on their loans. Artists, they've said, are probably the best ones to make housing loans to because they pay and they have really helped the community and made it, progress. So for those of you who don't even know, you know how great it is. Another place I want to talk about is Cumberland, Maryland. And again, they have an artist relocation project, but remember the slide on cultural districts. I wanted to mention that that's an easy way for communities also to attract artists, but also to invigorate their economies by developing a cultural district. They do not have to be designated by states or by city. You can even just say, we're making a cultural district, and guess what? They will come. In the case of Cumberland, Maryland, up in the mountains, Alleghenies, very poor, lost much of their industry, beautiful housing in downtown areas, part of the trail, the C&O Canal. And so what they did is they applied to the state of Maryland, who does have arts and entertainment district legislation, which allows tax credits. And they brought artists in because it's next to Pittsburgh, an hour and a half, 2 hours from D.C., to artists to come downtown and help have industry in their downtown. So they've been very successful with it. They don't put much money in it at all. They have some tax credits, but it's very minute. The big thing they do is, again, they work with the entire community to help market. And they do have some tax freezes that they provide some of the local businesses that may be arts related or not to help keep them in the district. The big thing I want to point out here is that it really didn't take much. And the economy in Cumberland, Maryland has almost quadrupled in the last 5 years because of this. Because artists have heard that it's a place that's welcoming. And my friend who runs the Arts Council there will tell you the story that when a new business approaches Cumberland and coming in town, he gets the call to come and meet with them and Department of Economic Development. So another lesson, work with all of your partners to help develop these new kinds of funding and revenue streams for your community, because everything that happens here goes right back into the revenue for the community, which then gets put back into the community and downtown and the arts. So one of my favorite programs, for those of you that live maybe more in rural areas, is a newer program, the Worm Farm Institute. How many of you have heard about this? Oh, great. So Worm Farm was started by this couple, and they came from Chicago, and they really were sick of it, and so they went to rural Wisconsin, and it was sort of like Green Acres. They had no idea about farming, but they decided they were going to do it, and so they started a farm, and they wanted it to really be unique, and they wanted it to be sustainable. So what they did is they started a sustainable agriculture program. They also wanted to sustain the arts. So one of the things they did is they worked with artists, and here you can see they have roadside cultural stands where the artists who come in and work with them sell their wares next to the local farm produce, but they also make these incredible farm stands. Doesn't cost my friends Jay and Karen, who run the organization, much, but the artists get a way to make a living and to really support their wares. The other thing they did is they just created their own artist residency program. Anybody can do this. They just said, hey, we got a barn, we got some artists, we need some help. So they just basically said, you come out, you be a resident, but guess what? You got to take care of these cows. You got to learn about agriculture. But it's been a fantastic project, and it's been nationally recognized. In fact, it just got an Our Town grant, and it, I believe, has gotten some USDA money. But it was a really interesting vision and a way to sustain something, which is what I'm trying to get across to folks, is that it's not about just a grant here and a grant there, but how do you sustain something and make a difference in your community? Another project that I really like a lot is in Milwaukee, a little bit bigger community, and this is also happening in other parts of the country, but Milwaukee's really done it right, and this is connecting creatives and commerce, and it's Creative Alliance Milwaukee. What it does is they recognize that they have a lot of creatives. When I say creatives, I mean people who are in the for-profit arts-related industries, design. They have a lot of manufacturing. They have a lot of people who can get jobs in those kinds of areas. But how do we attract them? How do we network them? And how do we keep them in Milwaukee? So they developed, it's almost like a chamber of commerce, but for creatives. So the Arts Council there worked very hard with the Chamber of Commerce, Department of Economic Development, and they make grants to creatives. They have an incubator. And they also, the big thing they do that's easy for you all to do, to think a little bit differently, is they just provide networking and ways for people to get together and share ideas. Because in the new economy, they have realized that there is a need for this kind of development to happen, and it's become very successful. So next I want to talk a little bit quickly about Arts Place. Arts Place is a grant-making partnership that is with, let's see, let me get this, 11 national arts funders, as well as 8 funders from the National Endowment for the Arts to some other federal agencies, as well as some other national foundations. And what it does is they fund vibrancy and diversity transforming communities. So it's about creative placemaking, which I know you guys have heard about. But they have funded things all across the country. One of the things that they funded in Minneapolis was a project where artists are working with all of the departments of planning to help plan for Minneapolis to become the next amazing art city, and also to use artists to help understand how to plan, because artists do planning very well. Their Department of Planning was really having a hard time, and so they collaborated, and Arts Place made a grant to them. Another one is Mass Inc., and this is a great project because it's basically using creative placemaking in 11 areas that have been very, very blighted because they were manufacturing. So how can we reinvigorate those spaces, put a theme together, and fund some really innovative projects? So Arts Place put money into helping, and you can see a festival here. So the thing I wanted to tell you is that, guess what? November 1st is a letter of inquiry, and I want you all to turn in a letter of inquiry because they really have said that they're looking for not only large communities, but small, mid-size, and rural communities to apply. And I think it's very important that you guys do that. It's a letter of inquiry. It's not a full application. Don't make anything up, but if you've got a good project, definitely go, and you can see the website's artsplaceamerica.org. You can look at a lot of the other things they've funded. I didn't have a lot of time to talk about all of those, but I can definitely talk to you offline. The next one is Our Town program. Have you heard about Our Town? How many of you heard about it? So Our Town is in its second year of funding, and or actually third. Now they'll be in 2013. They funded projects across the country, and of course their goals are improve quality of life, encourage community creative activity, foster community identity and a sense of place, and revitalize economic development. That's the goals. It's another placemaking project funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. So a few of the areas that they fund in fit very well with the things that you are doing in Tennessee. One is programming and events. So as you can see, Grand Rapids received a grant to do a large public wayfinding and festival. I think it's really going to be exciting. The next one is cultural district planning. Planning is a piece of the grant-making objectives. And so they funded a lot of different kinds of planning, but the one that I think was really good is this one in Dubuque. And again, on these grants, the fantastic thing is that it has to be part of government applying with an arts institution. You have to be a partner. Another project is in Wilson, North Carolina. This is a creative industries project, and basically it's funding an entity to help this artist with the Whirligigs project, where they are repairing and helping him reinstall all his work, which will then become a museum. So the deadline for this grant opportunity is January 14th. Okay, so think about it. You can go online and look at all the things that they fund, but I think it's really worth it for you guys to think about it. They're really looking for, like I said, small and rural communities. Not that all of you are from small and rural communities, but I think that's important to note that they are looking at that as well as the geographic spread. And I know some entities in Tennessee have received grants from Our Town, but we can certainly always use more. So finally, some of the key elements, and I know I went sort of quickly, but some of the key threads through all of these different projects, whether it be artist relocation or a couple having artists come and be part of their farm, or Creative Milwaukee, where they're really working at the for-profit arts industry. They all had some people and things behind them that made them work. And these are kind of the key areas that I think when you want to do this kind of project, here are the things that I think you should think about. Convene a group of stakeholders. Inventory your cultural assets. What do you have in your area that you can use to think about how you want to be better in your community, how you can apply for a grant, or how you can approach your mayor to say, you know what, I know how we can stimulate our economy. Develop a vision. Again, obtain buy-in from your community leaders. You need to make sure that they're a partner with you. Identify a leader who has passion. And I know all of you are those leaders. You're out there. We all run arts councils or arts organizations, and I can tell you no better leaders than you. So you're just looking at your leader. Just put the mirror up in your face and go for it. Cooperate and be part of a collaborative solution. Okay, so you want a leader, but you want to be part of a solution of a collaboration. So make sure that you're collaborating with your entire community or your entire arts organization, however, whatever your body is that you decide. And again, keep the focus on economic development. That's what I've tried to show you in some of the slides I've done today, is just how you can look at using the economy and tax incentives to revitalize, but also sustain the arts in your community. So I'm sure we'll be happy to take questions at the end, but I'm going to let my colleague take over. Thanks.
All right, thank you. My name is Mickey Sager, and I do work with the Conservation Fund. We're a national nonprofit that does do economic development and environmental protection.
Yay.
At the same time, we fundamentally believe that people should not have to choose, that they either have good jobs or have clean air and clean water. Those are rights that we all have. And the work we do is primarily because most of the poorest places are also located in our most important natural systems. In North Carolina, we've actually mapped it. 38 of our 40 poorest counties are in the 3 most significant ecosystems. So what we do, a long time ago people said, help us figure out how we can make money off the land without messing it up. And so what we do is we do rural development. I'm going to talk a little bit more from the practitioner perspective. We do have a whole program that I head up that we provide training, technical assistance, do a lot of organizational development assistance to grassroots groups. We have a network of over 300 grassroots groups across North Carolina in one state that we do, and most of them are rural. You may say, what the heck is an environmental person doing at the culture, the Arts Council meeting? One of the things we have found is there is a tremendous amount of cultural connections to the land when we do things, particularly in rural. And I'll tell you about a little bit about some of the things that our partners are doing. So this is going to be more from the practitioner perspective. It'll be more about how different communities have put together some creative financing to make projects happen. Basically, when we started talking about this, I said, oh, okay, well, we can do an overview of financial tools, and there are all these taxes and fees and special charges and all the things, a lot of which Teresa just went through. And then I said it's going to be late, it's going to be in the afternoon, people are going to be falling asleep, so instead of me sitting here talking about them, my PowerPoint presentation is printed out, you can get it, and there's a whole sheet at the end that has links to some of those different components. Again, fines and penalties, bonds, certificates of participation. A lot of these are things that are eligible, that you can use if you are working with a local government. Things like the Main Street program has absolutely defined, creative ways to finance arts and community development projects. There are creative things like tax increment financing, which is sort of like remember the old, Wimpy, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today? That's where redevelopment is actually financed using future gains in taxes to subsidize the development today. So there are very creative things out there that have been designed, that have been developed, and I would suggest that the easiest thing to do is to hook up, link arms with your tourism and your economic development people and say, let's do something together. Because they understand it, they understand the language, they understand the concepts and the tools, and they have access. So if you as an arts organization are working to do some creative projects, what our grassroots partners have found is that rural people are the most effective multitaskers I have ever seen in my life. You look at a farmer and you give them a roll of duct tape and some baling, wire, and they can just pretty much build whatever they want. What you'll find is that if you take your project and break it down into different components, it could be about economic development, job creation. It could be about, are there infrastructure or capital improvements, buildings that you're trying to work with? Adaptive reuse of structures. Are there workforce training or youth development components that you could work into it? Could you get part of the project done by putting young people to work, giving them jobs, teaching them skills, and getting funding from a different source that's not an art source, but a workforce development or a youth training program funding source to get the work done? Can you do environmental protection or energy efficiency improvements? There's a lot of energy efficiency improvement funding out there these days. So can you make your facility more energy efficient if that's better? So basically, look at the different components to your project, break it down, and then see how you can finance it. A couple of quick examples. Down in Texas, right along the border, the town of Broma, there was literally an entire block of buildings that were abandoned, that were starting to fall down. I believe the town actually received it as a donation, or they were in bankruptcy. And so what they did was they put together a creative plan where they got a private foundation to provide money to stabilize the buildings. And then they got transportation enhancement funding, which does provide for, which allows for historic preservation work to renovate the buildings, and now they've turned it into a national historic landmark, and all those buildings are thriving businesses. When you look at what you've got and you're trying to finance stuff, you should not just look at exactly where you're working. So Bryson City, North Carolina is in Swain County. It's on the other side of the Smokies. We were working with them on a downtown revitalization project, and we came to realize that they had an abandoned water supply watershed, which is basically lakefront property. It was up the mountain, and they didn't want to get rid of it, but they couldn't just hold on to it. At the same time, they had a river running smack through the middle of Bryson City, and they were having horrible, their infrastructure, their water and sewer infrastructure was like 100 years old. And so what we were able to do, we were able to help them sell the development, get water quality protection funding, sell the development rights on that abandoned water supply watershed. So they basically liquidated a physical asset they had. They got approximately $4 million for the development rights to that piece of property, and then they took that $4 million and put it into a special fund for projects in the downtown area. It's not only upgrading the water and sewer lines, but it's also providing economic development projects and things like that. So that was a case where a town had an asset, an existing asset they couldn't do anything with. They didn't want to sell it completely, but they were able to liquidate the assets and come up with some significant funding to support future projects. Roanoke River Partners is a group up in the northeastern part of North Carolina, 5 of the poorest counties in the state. Now, you've heard a lot today about how to collaborate, how to partner. These were 5 counties that had never even talked to each other, didn't believe in collaboration, didn't think they had anything to do with each other. They came to realize that actually the river, the Roanoke River, which connects every single one of them, was the one thing they had in common. And they said, yeah, but what do we do with that? Well, they actually they decided that they realized there was one place you could get a boat in on that river in over 200 miles. And so they said, well, if we can get more people to come and be on the river, we can get more people to come and visit our small towns. This is a place that has amazing small towns with incredible cultural resources, incredible historic structures. They started out by doing they put together 15 camping platforms. They sold them. They were $10,000 a piece for a sponsorship of a platform. The platforms are up in the upper end. They literally are amazing. You go in and you have an outhouse with a view. You have a place where you can sleep. Those 15 camping platforms are generating over $500,000 in economic impact in those 5 counties, just sitting there. And I will tell you, the mayor of Hamilton will ride down to the boating access point they've put in since. He will pick you up in his minivan. He will take you to the little restaurant down the street. And it's totally created a whole new infrastructure those small towns never had. One of the things that's fascinating is they actually have a Rosenwald School that was sitting vacant. It was abandoned. It was actually owned by a white family that had bought it. What they were able to do, now they are still working on the interior of it, but they've used a combination of grants, and it was really a bargain sale by the owner to purchase that building. They're now turning it into a visitor center, into a small business incubator. Now, because it will be a small business incubator, they will have access to additional economic development entrepreneurship funding. One of the things I'm going to emphasize, and this is something coming from the conservation world, is that you really, really, really don't ever think about automatically saying, a lot of folks in the community development world, for example, say, well, how much does that building cost? Okay, I'll pay it. If you are a nonprofit, keep in mind that lot of people can get tax benefits from doing what's called a bargain sale, where they sell you the building for less than it's valued at, and then they get to write off the rest on their taxes. Really quickly, Sandhills Family Heritage Association is another one of our partners. They have a small cinder block building. It's a historic structure, but not on the National Historic Register. But it's very, very important to the community. It was built by the community. In 1950, it was the place where people got married, they had their dances. It was where they had all the civil rights meetings, where they met and decided who was going to be the one child to integrate the high school. So it's incredibly important to these folks. It's on 2.5 acres of land. They went through a whole process where they mapped their assets. They actually sat down and said, what do we have that we can do something with? They mapped their assets, and they found, for example, that in the bottom left-hand corner, one of the things they identified was that there was incredible cultural traditions around folk medicine. If you were African American, you lived in the Sandhills of North Carolina back in the 50s and before, well, even now, you didn't have access to medicine. So they have figured out all kinds of ways that they can do. They basically took the cultural traditions about folk medicine tied to the land, and they created a book. They're using that to generate earned income. They have created a farmer's market that they got USDA funding for, and they are doing heritage tourism again. They're tapping the family reunion market, again, to do earned income. And then finally, and I'm going to say this because I'm old and I work with a young person who has told me that, Mickey, you need to learn about social media. Now, I can't do anything about social media. I can get on Facebook, that's about it. But one of the things that's been fascinating has been to see how a lot of our grassroots groups have started to use things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, some of the crowdfunding programs, organizations out there that basically provide small amounts. They tend to be small for smaller projects for under $10,000. But this grassroots group that's right on the New River in northwestern North Carolina was able to get just enough funding to help support the startup of this great community parade. And it's also generated new donors, people who never heard of them before, never would have heard of them before without Kickstarter. And so just be creative, learn lessons, really pay attention to using the language when you're crossing into other sectors, and there's amazing things that can happen. Thank you.
So, what I'd like to do is talk about two things. One is how the ARC program can provide grant support for all the kind of things you just heard about from all our previous speakers, not only here, but throughout the day. And the second is I'd like to talk about a program that the U.S. Department of Treasury has that provides some innovative tax credit opportunities, rather substantial tax credit opportunities, to help you finance your projects in your communities. So to start with, the Appalachian Regional Commission, you can go to the next. We're an economic development organization that focuses on the eastern part of Tennessee, really from Nashville east, 1/3 of the state. And we support a whole range of programs related to economic development and job creation throughout a 13-state region of Appalachia. The board of directors of ARC are comprised of the governors of these 13 states, and our federal co-chairman is nominated by the president and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. And we've had some wonderful federal co-chairmen, including Ms. Ann Pope, for a number of years that have led some very creative initiatives. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of those a little bit more tomorrow. We work also very closely with state government in these 13 states, and so we work either with the governor's office or Department of Community Development, Department of Economic Development, to help identify funding opportunities. And we also work with local development districts, to provide direct financial support to those districts and also work with them to identify opportunities in those communities. So if you're in that part of Tennessee, I think this is a real opportunity for you. Would you mind, folks here from East Tennessee, would you mind raising your hand? All right, wonderful. Folks who have worked with ARC before, would you mind raising your hand? Okay, well, so we do have a real opportunity here, don't we? The Commission focuses a lot of our work on the most economically distressed communities in Appalachia. And this map identifies in red those counties which are in the bottom decile nationally in metrics such as unemployment, poverty, and per capita income. So as you can see, 25% of the Appalachian region is in the bottom decile. That's rather significant. And so we try to target our funds in those communities. Salmon color counties are in the bottom quartile. ARC, as I mentioned, funds a broad range of activities, but specific to this conference, we're very interested in funding projects related to local assets, and whether those are the types of natural assets that Mickey discussed and focused on, the type of cultural assets that have been described here as well, the opportunities to develop structural assets, whether those are historic facilities in your communities or others. And of course, leadership, which is so important and has been emphasized here. We need those spark plugs, how to support the folks who provide vision and leadership in those communities. So ARC can underwrite all those types of activities with grant funding, but we do it not because we want to support arts or we want to support environmental programs. We do it for economic development purposes. So it's important that you have a tie to job creation. It's important that you have a tie to helping the local economy become more vibrant. And then that becomes an eligible activity for us. To date, ARC, well, not to date, but in about the last 8 years, the Commission has provided about $10 million in funding to over 130 plus projects. And as you can see, those projects totaled almost $30 million in activity. So another element of ARC's program is that we require local matching funds, either local match, state match, private matching support. Even other federal agencies are eligible as well. But we don't fund a project entirely on our own. We've had an interesting program evaluation undertaken. There's a little web link there that has evaluated all of ARC's tourism, a program evaluation of all of ARC's tourism, cultural heritage, and natural asset programs. That can give you an idea of the kind of things we fund, the lessons learned. Really some excellent lessons learned have been highlighted here today. So in the state of Tennessee, I'd want to encourage you to talk to the folks who run the ARC program here. And the program here in Tennessee is run out of DCED. And the program manager is Brooksy Carlton. So if you know Brooksy, if you don't know Brooksy, get to know her. She's out of Nashville. And the governor's representative on the ARC board is Alan Borden. And Alan is also with DCED. So if you feel like there's a match between what you want to do in your local community and ARC support, talk to your local development district and talk to Brooksy and talk to Alan. And the state prioritizes funding each year. Now in the fall is actually an excellent opportunity to go to the ARC program in Tennessee because those projects are really identified between now and the spring. It's an annual process, an annual appropriation that's provided from the Commission to the Tennessee program. I'd like to shift gears for a second, talk about a program out of Treasury, U.S. Department of Treasury. And it's a tax credit program. And it's a rather substantial tax credit program because it has provided $26 billion in tax credit allocations to private investment to over 500 investment funds across the United States. And the types of projects that we've described here, renovations of theaters, redevelopment of local assets, are perfectly suited for this program, the New Markets Tax Credit Program. There have been over 3,000 projects identified to date. And what's interesting is that there's a list of 10 states that have substantially underutilized this program that Treasury wants to target, wants to have greater access to. And yes, Tennessee is on that list, on that preferred list. Interestingly as well, by statute, 20% of these tax credits need to be used in rural communities. So if you're a rural community in Tennessee, you're way up at the top of that list. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this program works, but it's a large financing opportunity. The tax credits are 39% tax credits, so this is not a small amount of money. And it can also be matched with the historic tax credit. So if you take a new markets tax credit and match that with a historic tax credit, you can have tax credit equity in your transaction, 50% of your transaction. That means that on a $10 million deal, you only have to come up with $5 million because there are people who want to buy those tax credits and use them for other purposes, or to defray their taxes to the federal treasury. I'm sorry about the map, and I hope that can be seen throughout the room. But what that shows is areas in Tennessee that are eligible to use this tax credit. This tax credit is designed to move private capital into low-income areas. So all the areas in red are at the top of the priority list. All the areas in gray are also eligible. There's a lot of Tennessee that's eligible. This is all on the web, where the program is well described. And so it's by census tract. So you might have a particular city, for example, Nashville or Memphis, where portions of that city are eligible and portions of that city are not eligible based on a variety of income criteria. So if you have a project, you have to go to this Treasury website, punch in your 9-digit zip code and your address, and it'll tell you whether it's eligible or not to participate in this program. The way the program works, and I'm only going to go into it in the slightest bit of detail, is the tax credits that are provided, these 39% tax credit, are split between the investor wants to get part of that return, between the investment fund, because people set up investment funds to do this, and between, I have down here business, but in this case it could be a nonprofit business or the local community. So given that kind of split of this incentive, of this federal tax credit, you can find 20% or more of that equity can go into a transaction that you're trying to develop. And I'm going to provide an example of an arts transaction that's right on the edge of Appalachia to illustrate how this program might work. This Center for the Arts is a historic arts showcase in Roanoke that actually had performers like Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald perform there. Just a short walk from the railway in Roanoke, and if anyone's been to Roanoke, they know that's a real railway hub, a real railway center. This $4.4 million renovation helped develop a 200-seat theater, helped develop a range of community arts educational programs, became the home office for 2 performing arts organizations, and as well can be rented for private functions and other types of venues. The developer is a nonprofit organization, happened to be called Total Action Against Poverty. They own this facility, a nonprofit organization. Of this $4.4 million renovation, $4.1 million came from the New Markets Tax Credit Program. Of that, $3 million was in a loan that was interest only for 2.5%. Fairly attractive terms. The other $1 million out of New Markets was basically a forgivable loan. So if you comply with the terms of this program, it's quite a complex program, you automatically have $1 million of equity in that deal, which means you can go to a private bank and refinance it because your loan to value works. So it's a really worthwhile program to take a look at. If you're interested in it, you have to find a fund that has these tax credits. There are a couple hundred throughout the country. They're always looking for deals, especially rural deals in Tennessee because they're on that list. Your transaction has to be well suited for this. In other words, there needs to be some type of revenue stream, some type of form of repayment for the debt side of it. Again, there's a lot of great information available. So if you wanted to learn more about ARC and our asset-based development programs, there's a little web link there, arc.gov/ABD. Thank you all.
We are USDA Rural Development, and we've talked a lot about rural development and also rural areas. So that's what we do. It's strictly rural development. Our programs are based on the income levels of each county in Tennessee as well as the area. So any community, the program that I'm going to talk to you about specifically is our community facility loan and grant program. And I'm going to give you some success stories of projects that we have funded across the state, and some of you even may be in the room. We have 3 arms of our department. We have our housing program, we have our business program, and then we have community programs. Rural is defined right now, and it is up for debate, is anything less than 20,000 population. So keep that in mind as we talk about what we can do. I just want to preface what Ray said. He talked about the ARC. On West Tennessee's side, we have Delta Regional Authority. So DRA pretty much does the same thing as ARC does, and I would think some of the, I'm not familiar with a lot of their programs, but we do partner with them in West Tennessee. So they are our ARC. But I've heard a lot of great things about ARC projects, and we definitely partner with them. So that's another avenue that we have. Last year in Tennessee, we invested over $800 million in Tennessee through our programs. A lot of that actually came through our community programs. We are funded, of course, by Congress. So our funding levels are dependent on what our Congress determines that we were going to do. Last year, our community facility loan program was amazing what we had in our loan program. The problem that we had was because we weren't used to that level of funding, we didn't have a lot of projects in the pipeline, so we did not spend all of our money. So that is the loan program. Unfortunately, on the grant side, we do have very limited grant funds, and I know Ms. Pope talked about maybe a project that was talked about this morning. We don't have the flexibility of a lot of grant dollars, but if a community is eligible, if a nonprofit is eligible, then we're going to certainly try to get some grant money, some grant dollars to go along with that. So overall, 2012, we did over $800 million. I don't have a PowerPoint, but I do have a couple of handouts that will be available to you. We are all across the state. We have 8 offices. There's a program guide that pretty much tells you everything about that you ever wanted to know about rural development, but it also has a map on the back that tells where our offices are. Just get in contact with, I'm the area director for Northwest Tennessee, and there is somebody in each area of the state that can help you with your project. And I would encourage you, if you have anything in mind, please talk to our people. We can run numbers, we can talk to you about your ideas, we can try to steer you in the right direction. And I think that's the beauty of rural development, is because we do have people in every county and every area that can assist you, and that's our job, and that's what we want to do, because we do feel like that we have kind of a personal relationship with a lot of our customers, and we want them to be successful. So there are a couple of handouts that you can get that describes the program. For this purpose, for the arts councils and the things that you're more interested in, is our community facility loan program. Pretty much when I talk to somebody about a community facility loan, it's anything that a community identifies is something that they need for their community, whether it's a library or art center or fire station, fire trucks, police cars, anything like that. That's what we can do under this program. We can do purchase of real estate, purchase of equipment, machinery, but we cannot do startup costs or any kind of operating costs. So that kind of tells you what we can do. We can also partner with a lot of different other agencies, state funding, the DRA, ARC, those can all be partners. And certainly some of these the grant possibilities, maybe on some of the other agencies could give you grant money, and then we could give you the loan money. When we talk to people about loan money, and a lot of people don't like to hear that word, if you were to buy a building for your project, The maximum term on that is 40 years at 3.5% interest. So I just ran some numbers. If you borrowed $300,000, that's $1,100 a month payment, $14,000 a year. I'm going to tell you in a minute about some success stories, but you know, that revenue stream can come from a variety of sources. And I know you talk about fundraisers. I'm on the board of directors for the Carl Perkins Center, which is a child abuse prevention agency, and that's what we do. We fundraise, and I know that's one of the things that you have to do is in your organizations, but that is a way to be creative. We don't care where the payment comes from, but most of the time it's going to be from fundraising, events, things like that. But we have a very, under the community facility loan program, our delinquency rate, our foreclosure rate is hardly, it's zero pretty much, because we try to work with these communities. We realize that nonprofits do struggle sometimes. We want our projects to be sustainable, and we try everything we can to be successful. I'm going to give you some examples of some things. One of the things we talked about, one of the other partners talked about, was incorporating arts along with farms. And there, in fact, the news release came out today. There was a lady, she is in Michigan, but as part of her farm, she has started a pottery studio. And so that's, she has a pottery studio. She's also opened up her farm for about 20 other artists that come, and they have events, and they have festivals, and all kinds of things. But one of the things that was very unique about this was she got an energy grant from USDA to install some solar panels on her barn. And so she's using that. That's going to be, because she's selling that electricity back to the grid, she's going to use that as a revenue stream. And I was reading a lot of the comments that went along with the press release, but if you're from a small town, you know how people like to respond to articles. That some were very negative about that, but her point was she's got this asset out there. It was a great idea. It's a 25% grant, so she's investing 75% of her own money in the project. It's a revenue stream for her, but it's also conserving energy. She's doing the right thing by installing solar panels. So that was kind of an interesting story that I thought was, that could be, the energy grants that we have to go to farmers or small businesses. So if you had, we can't make them to nonprofits or municipals, but if you had an artist out there that had a project that wanted to do something like that, a business, then they could certainly do that. In West Tennessee, some of the projects that we have done in recent times, first of all, in Covington, which is where I live, the historic Ruffin Theater in downtown Covington, of course, was a historical building. It was opened in 1936. It was a 682-seat movie house listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We came in with a $40,000 grant and a $230,000 loan to make their restrooms handicap accessible. We did some renovations, tried to update a lot of the inside, as well as doing some work on their marquee and preserving that historic part. But what they do is a lot of plays. They do a lot of productions. They've even got this weekend and last weekend had a haunted house in there. They host the Miss Tipton County Beauty Pageant. They have the symphony come in and do events. But they're a real active core group that have done a really good thing. The theater is actually used as a background for a lot of the photographers in town. They use that, and it looks really cool. The Hardeman County Arts Council also received some money from us several years ago, and they have in fact paid their loan off before time. And a lot of the cases that I'm going to tell you today have actually done that. So it is possible. You think 40 years is a long time, and you think probably that payment's really high, but in most instances, these nonprofits have paid their loans off way ahead of time. That was Hardeman County Arts Council. One new one that we're doing right now is the Macgyver Grant Library in Dyersburg. The library foundation actually got a loan from us, and it's under construction now. But as part of their library, Dyersburg is probably population, it's over 10,000 population. But they are putting as part of their library in a wall for lighting devoted to the arts. They're going to have a place for a grand piano. They've got an outdoor garden area where they're going to be able to do musical events. So they're making, as part of that library, a focus on the arts to be able to engage the community. One of their ideas was that anybody can come to the library, and anybody will come to the library, and they want anybody that comes, anybody in Dyersburg, to be able to experience any kind of cultural activity. So that was kind of a neat thing, because they are going to emphasize the arts as part of their library. So that's just a way that you can use what you've already got and enhance the arts. The Fair Theater in Somerville, Fayette County, this was another theater that was started in the early 30s. It was the main attraction in the time, 25 cents for a drink, bag of popcorn, and a movie. But of course it closed during in the 50s. In 1999, the family that owned the theater actually approached the city about buying the theater, and they did. And then the city actually started revitalizing and renovating. Again, they wanted to preserve the historic aspect of that. They got at that time, we had lots of grant money, so that we gave them a $99,900 grant to do some renovations. Again, handicap accessibility issues, which we have to do. If you get federal funding, you have to have your building handicap accessible. We did some work on the marquee to preserve the historic aspect of that. And they've just they've got a plan, and every year they've done something to improve that project. So they even use, because the city owns it, the police department uses it for city court. I guess that's how they can justify putting money into it. But they do a lot of benefit concerts. They show movies. They're really tied to the educational system, the school system, have the kids in for movies. They run a summer school reading program. Local businesses use it for their meetings, training meetings, because it's equipped with audio. But that is, all of these have been really like downtown. So I think that's a whole lot of part of downtown revitalization. Someone mentioned the tax credits that cities can get to, what is tax increment financing? Mm-hmm. We've had a couple of towns in Tennessee to get that. In West Tennessee, again, I don't know about across the state. I just know there's 2 cities that received several $1 million over a 10-year period to be able to revitalize their downtown, and the arts is part of that. And that, again, you would need to, I guess, lobby your state representatives, your state senators to try to get that program implemented more so in Tennessee. There's 3 other examples in Middle Tennessee. The Art Guild at Fairfield Glade. Fairfield Glades is a retirement community. They've been very successful. They have 130 members, and they, again, have paid off our loan early. The Art Center of Cannon County, and I think that's probably one you were talking about. Maybe they were here. But they've got a long history, too. They have they say that they reach 40,000 people a year and 150,000 through the internet and the things that they're doing worldwide. So I thought that was really interesting. And then the Cumberland County Playhouse, again, was started by a local family, and they've tried to preserve that through the years. So there's a lot of arts centers that have been really successful across the state, and we have had a hand in that. We talk about the successes, but then we also have some that don't do so well, and I think we're going to talk about that more in our question and answer session. But I think the key to any of the successes is strong community support. It would be nice for every community to have a patron that just gives and gives and gives, and but in reality, a lot of our communities just don't have that. But it takes a person with passion, whether they have a thick checkbook or not. They have to have that passion, and they have to be able to go to your community leaders, your mayors and your other city officials, your state officials, and be able to promote your project. So marketing is a huge key. Some of the organizations that I have seen that have failed have gotten kind of stingy on their administrative cost and trying to, I guess, get the community out of it and try to make it a venture that it's not community oriented. So I think that's a key to it. But we are here to assist you. Again, if you have a particular project that you just want to talk about, please feel free to call me or one of my counterparts across the state, and we'll be glad to walk you through the process.
I think we had talked about doing some questions amongst ourselves, but the taskmaster over here, Shannon, has told me we've got to move along. So why don't we open it up for questions, and if we have any time left, we may do a little bit here and follow up with a question or two. But does anybody have a question in the audience for our illustrious panel? We just warn you out.
I actually jotted the note down during Ms. Sager's presentation, but it probably applies to all of you. We seem to have this paradox in politics right now with politicians wanting to shift responsibility to state and local governments and nonprofits for a lot of this infrastructure planning and funding. And they're talking about removing the federal monies that seem to be the engines that make these things happen. So my question is, from your perspective, what's the real threat level to this federal funding that is so important to keeping these projects alive?
You should ask Ray that one. Well, the short answer is it's all at risk, I think. What we have seen on the ground is that it is the grassroots groups that, as the federal funding quit coming to the states and then the states cut off the funding to the local governments, what we're seeing is that grassroots groups increasingly are providing services that truly should be provided by local government. And so what we are seeing, though, is that the most effective ways of dealing with that are to partner. You know, there are fewer resources for everybody, and nobody likes sharing. And I will tell you, you know, every single funder will tell you that you're supposed to partner with people, and then they'll go in their little room and say, good Lord, I had to try partnering with another funder, and it was the worst thing I ever had to do. You know, so it's difficult, but the reality is, you know, a lot of the funding is on the chopping block.
We at Americans for the Arts have a paid legislative affairs staff person who all they do is advocate with other federal agencies to try to make sure that the arts keeps in those pots, but it is becoming harder. But I will tell you that our local arts agencies, and some good examples in Tennessee, who are really coming to the table and really partnering with their economic development offices and really saying, look, we can work together, and really here's how we can go to a newer economy and a newer model. They've been very successful. And I think some of the other places that I've seen that are even more rural, they're very scrappy. So they've never had any federal money in the first place. So they're really working on a different set of models and a different vision. But I do think that a lot of it is in jeopardy. And for those of you who know about the what was the ICE-T funds, but now it's transportation funds, a lot of the public art was funded through that in the U.S., and a lot of that's been cut out. So that is an issue, and our National Main Street program is going to be going private soon as well. So that's another piece that's going to be happening. Ray?
I think the one thing I'd add is that I would encourage you to involve your local elected representatives in successful projects that you have in your communities. So I think what we often see is that something that happens far away, that's a bad idea. But for an elected official, when it happens in their community, that's a great idea. And they really want to support that. And they want to use it as a best practice model. I'd also say that Ann has a lot of experience in this too. I don't know if you have a perspective.
Well, the other thing that I would just say is when you talk about elected officials, all politics is local. And, for those of you who don't know every one of your elected officials and you don't invite them, it's National Arts and Humanities Month. It's October. You need to focus on those times and other times, but you need to get your elected officials out and about in your places, and not just your state reps, but your federal reps. They really listen to you, and I can't stress that enough, because they really take their constituencies really seriously. And enough of you get together, they will come to your events, and I'm sure many of them do, but you need to also hold them accountable when they're in D.C. And just to plug, we have National Arts Advocacy Day in April. It's very successful, and I'd encourage you all to come to that. It's a great event, very reasonably priced. We can always find roommates for you, and it's a great way to go and advocate, just not necessarily for just national endowments for the arts money, but money that's coming to your state from the federal government.
Well, I will take Ray up on that and add one point. I think you will notice that the potential funders up here, all of them, perhaps except for Teresa, who's here as a practitioner and really has a bird's eye view of what other arts organizations have done, everybody who is up here are non-arts funders. And so I think, the idea that government, particularly federal government and state governments, are very siloed in what they do. They'll fund for a particular activity. These organizations that are represented up here are very used to partnering, for an activity, perhaps a singular activity in a larger project. So I think, as you go back and think, I don't know why, we had this panel with people who are non-arts government agencies. I think this is in some ways, areas that perhaps we have not tapped, where everybody's interested in economic development. But, I think there was a lot of things said today about maybe there is a workforce development piece to this, or an education piece of this that you can couple together to make your project work.
I think one of the examples that I gave of the library in Dyersburg, they actually borrowed $2.2 million, and when the project is complete, they will probably be able to pay us back probably 90% of that as soon as they close the loan, because what we were able to do is loan them the money. We had plenty of loan dollars, and we still do have plenty of loan dollars. But then they went out and they have done a capital campaign. They've tapped into several private foundations, and I think that's what you need to keep in mind too. Is there's lots of private foundations, a lot of private investment. And I think when your community sees that you're working hard to get private dollars and not just public dollars for your project, then they're going to support you more than just, saying you got a grant from the city or you're wanting the city to help you do these projects. So I think that's worth pursuing as well.
One other thing I would mention is that, for those of you who are in urban areas, check into whether or not the city that you live in is, what do they call it, the community development block grant funding, where what do they call it? CDBG. Yeah, well, CDBG funding in big urban areas, they automatically get their grants. They don't have to compete for them. They just say, this is how much money we want. And keep in mind the process. The process is that they also say, this is how we want to spend our grant money for the next year. So if you're sitting down and talking with your community development program officers, who are in charge of that CDBG funding, you can help, theoretically, influence what they decide to use the funding for. One of our grassroots groups in Asheville, for example, North Carolina, has a green jobs training program. They had in the middle of the community, a really run-down, abandoned school that was really the heart and soul of that community at the time it was being used. They recently got a $4.3 million grant to redo that school. They are putting young people with barriers to employment to work, giving them job skills, giving them construction skills. They're redoing that building, and they are, again, revitalizing the community. If you're in a rural area, the sad part about CDBG is you actually have to compete. The people with the least capacity have to compete for those CDBG grants. But if you are working with the program officers on it, you have an opportunity. Think creatively. Keep in mind, the arts is an important part of the economy. And when you have industrial recruiters, which I don't know about y'all in Tennessee, North Carolina, our industrial recruiters just are quite sure that they're going to get, the next bazillion-dollar plant, to wherever. And something like 5% of companies in the whole U.S. ever change location. So you've got a whole bunch of people, economic developers out there looking for somebody that is going to, may or may not come. On the flip side, they all are talking about competitiveness. Arts can be their competitive edge. People who, particularly high-tech companies, are looking for the kinds of amenities that are brought by arts councils and artists, whether they're rural or urban. So keep in mind that you all have something to bargain with.
Any other questions? One last question.
I'm just wondering about the private sources of funding that you were mentioning. And I just wanted to ask all of you to reflect on some of the kind of bigger private funders. I'm thinking of community foundations, for example, in the Northeast area, that they tend to be the first ones that jump in when projects like this are being done. Can you think of other examples to share for private foundations or funders that might partner with you typically?
No, looking at me.
Teresa, I know you're not a funder, but you might have that national.
Well, thanks, Maren. This is the classic Maren Brown question. She does this all the time. Well, I think community foundations, how many of you have community foundations where you are? Yeah, I think they're a great source. The other piece of private funding that I think you all should think about is, and this is a whole other conversation, but there's a huge wealth shift happening in the U.S., and a lot of community foundations are working to develop funds, and I would definitely talk with them, not about maybe, you could talk to them about your project and if they have money, but they also advise donors. And so if you look at donor-advised funds through your community foundation, everybody know what that is? Okay, good, because sometimes we use jargon and it's like too much. But it's basically talking to somebody who might be interested in moving their funds toward your program, and often they're housed in community foundations. But there is a huge wealth transfer that's happening in the U.S., and I think there's a real opportunity to talk about that and have the conversations and to make sure that you can be at the table with your community foundation or some other kinds of planned giving opportunities in your community to help identify some of those individuals that may have that wealth. Also, you want to look at in your community if there are some foundations out there that might be giving associated with some of your companies. They may be, you may have a, I don't know, a gas station that's part of a larger group of gas stations across the country, and they often do have their own corporate foundation support that you can take advantage of. I'm from Wyoming originally, so I know about like how hard it is to find anybody to give money to anything, but you would be surprised at just having an opportunity to have a conversation with a group of people, how many of them will come forward and say, you know, I want to put a little group together that's going to fund that project, and that's what crowdsourcing is doing. But I know that a lot of small group funders have come together, like ladies who, you know, maybe they do quilting in my case, who came together and said, we want to help youth in our community, but I can only give like $300 a year. But through 12 of them, that ends up to be quite a bit of money and helped a small project. So may not help you, but I know that many of you are practitioners that can help you identify those resources for some of the people you're working with.
Our national office just put together a resource list of foundations that have partnered on our projects, and I'll get that out. I can send it to Ann, and she can disseminate that out to you, because we had to gather a lot of information, and it was a nationwide project, so I can get that to you.
And don't forget about the Foundation Center, just so you know that.
If you're in the Appalachian region, there's a relatively new group called the Appalachian Funders Network, which has about 35 philanthropies as members, ranging from national to regional to community foundations. They have a very specific and targeted area of giving that they want to focus on, and the one that's relevant, I think, for this group would be value-added food systems related to asset-based development. So it's not quite art-related, but just, yeah. But it's not quite art-related, but if you're doing something around value-added food systems, that could be a good organization to go to. Aggregation of funders. And a couple people mentioned this crowdfunding. I mean, that is a great idea. You know, quite frankly, it is a lot easier to raise $40,000 going to crowdfunding than to wait a year for a philanthropy to make a decision. It's a really huge opportunity. Huge opportunity. If you can package your project effectively, it's a tremendous opportunity.
And I would just say from a national perspective, national trend perspective, what we're seeing is that the funders, the major funders, and actually local funders too, that really pretty much quit giving grants to anybody new when the economy crashed, are finally starting to come around, because they do operate on a 3-year rolling average, model. But they are finally starting to come around, and they are taking new folks. And going back to what Teresa said about the transfer of wealth, keep this in mind. Well, one, keep in mind that the numbers that are being tossed around are like in the $40 to $50 trillion of personal wealth that are being shifted, transferred from the baby boomers on down. If you go check, I think it's the Center for Rural Entrepreneurship has done most of the studies. I don't know if Tennessee's been studied, but when they do it, typically what they will do is they will study a whole state, and they will come up with a report that, and this may be something for the Arts Commission to partner with the Tennessee Community Foundations on, but they'll come up with a report that says, here's how much wealth we think is in each county in the state. So it's incredibly helpful, whether you have a community foundation or not. It's incredibly helpful information, so you can say, where are all those people hiding, or whatever. So just nuts and bolts. try and find out if that's been done in Tennessee.
Well, we're going to have to wind this up. I can't thank the panel enough for coming here to this beautiful place and helping us on this very important issue. Thank you so much for coming. Can we give them another round of applause?